Hello and good afternoon, or in some cases, good evening, or in some cases, good morning. My name is Chris, and we're seeing the first 50, 60, 70 people file in the room. So we're going to start in about 30 seconds. We're going to let everyone grab their seats, so to speak. So welcome everyone to this really exciting webinar on how leaders should think about business model innovation in highly uncertain times. And my name is Chris. I'm joining you from Norway in our offices. And as you can see, Alex has taken the day at the beach. How are you doing there, Alex?
Perfectly fine. It's a bit windy today at the beach, but otherwise good.
It looks like enjoyable conditions.
Yeah, I joined Richard Branson and got a bit of his island, you know.
Yeah, you put it up. We're gonna talk about that. Indeed, we have uncertain times, and I wanted to just sort of start out with sort of a quick look back. I don't know how many of you guys have this book in this design. So this is, Alex just told me this was you call it the first edition, Alex?
The black edition, yeah, the very beginning.
The very beginning, yeah. So Alex, I've followed your work probably for around 10 years. This has May 2010, so that's pretty much 10 years. And I'm really, really happy to have you join us here today. We're looking forward to a really exciting conversation.
I hope so.
So as some of you probably know, this is the third in a series of 6. We had Scott Anthony, Peter McGrath. Today we have Alex on business models. We have Bill Fisher, dear friend of Alex in Switzerland. We have Rick Rasmussen giving us the perspectives from the Valley. And then we have Simon Torrance to talk about platforms and digital business models. And those are all coming up. As you know, we see the first questions are coming in. So please type up any questions to Alex that you may have as we proceed. You can take questions anytime. You can have questions at the end. And we will have time for a good Q&A towards the end of the webinar today. So my name is Chris, and Alex probably doesn't need a lot of introduction, but he is one of the world's leading authorities on business model innovation and also corporate innovation at large, ranked number 4 currently at the Thinkers 50. And I think probably what I could mention is, correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, but I think what you and your team have done is that you have more than just a business model canvas. It's really driving this concept of visualization, working with Dave Gray and with Holger and others. But I think what you guys have done have really started a lot of other work in that field.
You bet, right? It's, you can't operate with a Swiss Army knife. So I believe in using the very best tools, and some of them come from us, some of them come from other people. You use them together, right? It's not the Swiss Army knife approach where you try to perform heart surgery with a tool that's supposed to do everything. Business Model Canvas was our first tool. It allowed us to learn how to use visual thinking in strategy. And then we expanded from there. And it basically was every time we saw a problem in the field, a challenge, we created a new tool or combined it with other tools. And we put it together in a toolbox, if you want, which we just published in our last book.
I think, probably several people on this call right now today joined your Business Design Summit in Berlin in 2013?
That was a long time ago. Yeah, it was somewhere around 2013. Yeah.
But it has been really, really a pleasure and really impressive to follow your development and follow your creative work in different fields. And you have a new book, like the new book also coming out later this year. Was that right?
So it just came out actually last week, The Invincible Company. Interesting time to launch a book, but I think it's actually very timely. Oh, how did that happen? You try to do everything with technology, but it doesn't. Sorry for that. That's when your computer answers instead of your phone that's on silent. Yeah, no, it just came out actually last week. So interesting time to launch a book, right? Because book sales are down 60% or so. But the book we launched, The Invincible Company, is actually pretty timely because it allows you, and I'll get to that a little bit later, it allows you to build a more resilient company and, actually explore business models, which is a great opportunity now because some companies have to pivot. So I think it's an interesting time, with all the, suffering that we have from the health perspective, and the economic downturn is also an opportunity. So, we can't change the environment. All we can do is make the best of it.
Yeah, and it's a challenging environment. I'll give a brief introduction to the agenda that we have today. So our topic is really, how should leaders think about business model innovation in uncertain times? And I think those uncertain times are becoming even more uncertain. So we'll hand it over to Alex in just a minute, and then we'll open up for a little bit of discussion. We'll have some Q&A, and then we're going to have Alex do some summary conclusions towards the end. But I want to just set the scene really quickly. And I think, at least from what we are seeing in the Nordics and beyond, we are probably entering a whole new world in terms of business volatility. Just before this call, I got off the call with the CEO of an energy company, and his strategy framework and his strategy landscape has basically shifted radically in just the last 2 weeks. And we're seeing this in so many different industries. This is Disney. Just a couple of days ago, they're basically laying off 100,000 employees. Which, at least in the US, it's not a lighthearted decision. And the question really sits, on the back of many's minds: could they have done something different? Is there a business model innovation play that Disney didn't take? Recently, we saw for the first time ever oil price go below zero, and that's interesting. And at its extreme peak, companies actually had to pay in contract close to $40 to get rid of an oil barrel. And I was speaking with a chief strategy officer for an oil and gas company yesterday, and he was like, we don't know what to do. We don't have any answers. This is such uncharted territory that we have no idea. And then we had Virgin. Of course, Virgin is a well-known brand. It's a very broad portfolio of businesses, and this is unprecedented. Richard Branson writes an open letter, basically struggling to survive. And in that letter, he says, over the 5 decades I've been in business, this is the most challenging time we've ever faced. And he goes on to basically say, I would put up my private island as collateral to try to get a chance at government bailout. And, it's basically, it's in the cards that if the UK government doesn't offer a bailout, Virgin is going out of business, particularly Virgin Airline in the UK and beyond. So, that was not something they had in their business model 3 months ago. And probably didn't even have it on the landscape. And we are seeing this in so many different industries. And I think, Alex, we were just talking about Ken Rogoff, and he's been speaking recently that, we have to brace ourselves, and companies and governments need to brace themselves for the worst recession in 150 years. So it's not just our lifetime, but it's actually generations of lifetimes. And this is unprecedented. But like you said, companies can't sit still. They need to think about what do we do and how do we think about business model innovation in extremely uncertain times. So Alex, that's the framing. I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts and also learn more about your new work.
Okay, so I'm going to try to share my iPad. I don't know did that work? Can you see my iPad? Okay, so I'm experimenting here a little bit because I do think, a situation like this requires a big, bold experimentation. So I'm going to do a small experimentation with the format I use. I'm using a new app to draw and Procreate. But I want to just give a little bit of context in addition to what we just heard, right? So everything basically starts with an idea at the beginning before you have a business or before you innovate or before you pivot even, right? So it starts with an idea. And then, the big thing is that you go on this journey, and this journey is all about going towards building a business. That's the objective, or pivoting in order to reestablish your business. Now, here's the thing that very often people think, oh, this is about, creating a business plan of how we're going to execute this. But the problem in innovation is it's a very messy journey, right? It's ups and downs, it's forward, backward. Customers don't want to pay what you think they're going to pay. So it's back to the drawing board. And if you survive this journey, good ideas, rest in peace, right? If you survive this journey, you get towards building a business. And one of the challenges right now is obviously that this search, we need to do it faster than ever before, right? We need to search for viable business models or new value propositions faster than ever before. So the first thing that we can see, you know, related to the crisis is organizations who have, you know, stopped searching and they focus completely on execution and management. They don't have this skill anymore. They don't know how to manage this, you know, chaos that you can actually orchestrate. There's a system to it. There are processes to manage this search. But now what's interesting is once you kind of got to this business model, you find your first business model, not with a business plan, but actually by searching, what happens is, oops, there's the wrong tool here, RDC. What happens is you actually focus on scaling that business model that you found. So now your logic completely changes. This is not a search. Now it's a scaling and implementation. And now you could actually write a business plan and make projections because now it's about growing what you have. So this kind of draws what every company, what every established company has, small or big, is two words, two worlds, if you want. The first one here, the search world, I'll call it the world of exploration, right? Explore. And then on the right-hand side, you have the world of exploit, growing existing business models and sometimes improving them. But what happens is, you know, these two worlds are so different that sometimes we forget where we started out. Every company, every established company was once a startup. It's just that we unlearn how to do this search because what we really focus on is managing what we have. And management is a good thing, but it's not enough, right? When the world gets disrupted, what you knew worked doesn't anymore, right? We saw Disney with theme parks. That is gone for at least a year, right? Until we have a vaccine and we can get back. So what do? So if you have nothing here in your portfolio of exploration, or if you didn't, diversify enough, and there's some diversification at Disney, because they earn a lot from movies and they launched, you know, their new streaming channel, etc. But the biggest part actually today still comes from the theme parks. So those are two worlds. That's the foundation. And what we need to understand is on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, we have uncertainty. That's where we are today. So we're back to exploration, whole new world with different variables. On the right-hand side, we have a little bit more certainty, but that is not a world we have today. So basically, and now here's where I'm going to try to switch, see if I can do that. Basically, we have these two worlds of explore and exploit. And that's why we came up with a new tool, because we saw that companies have a hard time managing both under the same roof, because it's not that one is better than the other. One is about exploring in uncertainty and the other one is exploiting. It's just that right now, this one is more important because we have so much uncertainty. So the question is, how do you kind of build this up? So let me show you here. We said, well, in order to really do this well, you actually need to have a portfolio to manage your existing businesses. And what you look at for your existing businesses is how much money do they make? So you look at the return. The higher up, the better, of course, you know, very profitable business. The lower down, the less interesting. But when you start out with a new idea, it's at the bottom left. But then the other axis that's really interesting, and this is the one that affected us right now, is the axis of death and disruption risk. Okay, so you start out, I'll draw this with the little business model canvas, and I won't go too much into explaining the business model canvas, but I'll draw it for those of you who know it. You start out with a business model, maybe a young company, doesn't make that much profit. You're trying to scale it. The more you scale it, the more you grow, the more profit you make, and the more established it probably gets. So the death risk goes down, and you try to bring it up here where it's very profitable and protected from the environment. But what happened now here with COVID, right? I don't know how you draw it, virus. This should be the COVID-19 virus. looks more like a sun. Well, sun will show up one day. But what happened is, bam, we got disrupted. Or if you take Kodak, they were disrupted by digital film. And if you don't watch out, and this is very hard today because as you know, Ken Rogoff just showed, it's a 1 in 150 time year recession, you actually are at risk of disappearing. And in the case of Kodak, that happened because analog film was disrupted by digital film, by digital cameras, and now it's COVID-19. Now, sometimes you can figure out a new path back up, which we call renovation, shifting your business model. So there is a possibility to shift. Not always, because sometimes your business model is just dead. That's what's happening to banking and pharmaceutical companies and probably oil companies. Their business model is dying. So it's kind of hard to rescue them. So that's the world of exploitation. And that's what the world we came from, if you want, pre-COVID-19. And we need to be able to manage that. And I think companies are starting to get better at that. Maybe not necessarily at business model disruption, but they're not too bad at managing their portfolio. What companies are really not good at is managing an exploration portfolio. So we're gonna look at this for a second. So here you need to have a portfolio as well. And the same axis almost, here we have the profit or return axis, but it's expected return. Because when you're exploring, you don't know if your idea is gonna work. So you might start out with an idea that looks very profitable on paper and in your spreadsheet, but basically it's just an idea and a fantasy. So the hardest thing in innovation is to accept you don't know if it's gonna work, however good it looks. And you know, some founders and established CEOs, like the founder of Intuit, he likes to say, behind every big failure, they have a beautiful spreadsheet because they looked at the expected return and they said, oh, that's great, we're gonna make a business plan. And guess what happened? It got disrupted, right? Or not disrupted, it failed because it was just a fantasy. Actually, they mistaken, to use Steve Blank's word, they mistaken vision and hallucination. And that's exactly why we need to work on this bottom axis here, which is not death and disruption risk, but innovation risk. The risk that you're going to work on an idea that actually can't work in the market. So when we have these ideas here, up here, we need to get out of the building, to use Steve Blank's work, you know, who launched the whole lean startup movement, and maybe customers will tell us they're not willing to pay. So our business model just got a lot less profitable. And then we try to adapt it and pivot it and change it until we test it enough so that we can transfer it to the exploit portfolio. Now, what's interesting for us now, this is the world we're in, where a lot of companies, maybe besides Netflix and Zoom, we have to try to explore more and fast. And that's very hard when you've never established these exploration capabilities because these worlds are so different. Right here, the culture is about failing, learning, adapting, going really fast. Here, the culture is a lot more about following processes so you can scale and predict. That's really, really, really important to manage under the same roof. So again, it's not either or, it's and. So let me just draw one more thing here to kind of complete the picture and help us understand how to act in today's world. Because when we say, oh, everybody now needs to innovate, or even before, sometimes people said, oh, everybody needs to be an innovator at the company, I think they're a bit wrong. Because there are two worlds, and let me go back here very quickly just to, I don't know if I can do this, to this layer. No, it doesn't work. Let me go back to this one. What we want to understand is that there are three types of innovation. And I bluntly steal here from Clay Christensen's work and team, where he says there's three types of innovation. Oh, here, somehow I can't get, this is where the experiment is failing. I can't write anymore. Well, let me see here. Here we have uncertainty is very low. So the kind of innovation that we're going to focus on here is efficiency innovation. we're going to make business models and value propositions better, efficiency innovation. Now, guess what? Efficiency innovation is only about making your existing businesses better, which means if, today, so I'm seeing some messages coming up. If your business model got disrupted by COVID-19, or it got disrupted in general before or after COVID-19, efficiency innovation is not going to be enough, which means you're just going to more efficiently die with a dying business model. Rest in peace. And that is a big, big threat for certain industries like pharmaceuticals and banking. Their business models are dying. So efficiency innovation is good, but not good enough when your business models are dying. So you need to focus on here, sustaining innovation, which will extend your business model, maybe with new value propositions. Here in COVID-19, we're seeing companies pivoting to new products adapted to the COVID-19 environment. I just saw a Japanese company, making tents for home offices, right? That is a company that used to make furniture, and now they're making tents for home offices in Japan. This is a pretty big market, right? So not to neglect. And then over here is where we have transformative innovation. And that would typically be, Amazon Web Services here. When they launched, that was a completely new business unit, and it became a completely new P&L, and it went up here, right? So we need to really be able in companies to establish these three types of innovation. And, some of the things that Roger Martin said, I didn't follow this particular talk, that he had with you, Christian, but I think what's really interesting is he's saying, and I really believe this, is now is the moment for bold experiments where it's not enough to do efficiency innovation, because typically that is dead. When your business model got disrupted, efficiency innovation is not going to help. Sustaining innovation is a good start, but often not enough. What we really want is this kind of transformative innovation here. So that's what we need to start to do. Now, let me just draw one last thing, and then maybe we can get to questions. Here is, what's the logic of exploration? There are two things that we need to be able to do. And that is, number one, reduce risk and uncertainty. Reduce risk and uncertainty, which means here, this one, I need to be able to get more and more evidence that proves that my idea is right, reducing risk and uncertainty. So the question is, how do I do that? Well, as I said, you Steve Blank's work, you get out of the building and you talk to customers, or you talk to stakeholders, supply chain. And what you're going to learn is, they're going to say that's a stupid idea. And that's okay, because you just learned that you were wrong. That's failure. But failure is good as long as it's cheap and fast, because you just learned what not to do. Then maybe you make a paper prototype, okay, something here, you show it to customers, still failed, but again, you know what to do, what not to build, and what to pivot towards. And then, you start maybe with a technical prototype. So you constantly increase your investments in experimenting. The more you've learned, the more you know, which means, remember this messy process I drew? This is what we can systematically do to reduce risk and uncertainty. And now here's the challenge, right? How long have most, countries been on lockdown? Somewhere between, 6 and 4 weeks or 3 weeks. But that is a long time, but it's actually possible to go really fast. Because people here think, oh, I need to build something to test. No, you don't. First thing is to prove that customers have particular jobs, pains, and gains. You can do that within a week. You can easily talk to 100 customers over Zoom when Zoom is working, right? And otherwise you use whatever else, so WebEx or Microsoft Teams. So that's what we mean with testing, and you need to do it faster than ever before. So the companies that establish this exploration capability, they're able to do this today easily. Now, just quickly back to this one, there's another axis that, and maybe I'll just answer that a little bit later. Can I do just one more, can I show one more thing, Christian?
Absolutely. I mean, you're doing fine on time, so go ahead.
Okay. So here, we had exploration, and we just looked at the innovation risk and how to reduce innovation risk, right? By testing and bringing evidence to the table. Here, expected return is about designing better business models. So you can see behind me, I left the beach and now I have our new book behind us. So one of the things that we put into our new book, let me see if I can make this magic work. Seems like that worked. Okay, here. We worked on business model patterns. So what we tried to do is say, you don't want to just compete on product, services, and price. You want to build better business models. And we came up with this business model pattern library where you can get inspiration, just like in architecture, you have pattern libraries, in software, you have pattern libraries. Same in business. Rather than just trying to come up with new products, what if you try to come up with better business models? Because that will allow you to design better business models, assess the ones you're looking at, maybe even disrupt and transform industries. And the last one, as a leader, ask better questions so your teams don't just explore market opportunities or technology innovations, but come up with better business models that are more robust. And if we go back to this explore, exploit, we talk about two types of patterns. The first one is what we call invent patterns, where you start a little bit from a greenfield, from an opportunity, and you design, you get inspiration from this pattern, and then you design a better business model because it's maybe more scalable, it's more protectable, it has recurring revenues, etc. But then if you're an established business, you might also want to explore, not just doing something new, but improving what you have. So here, we're starting from an existing business model and we're asking ourselves, which shift patterns could help us make our business models better and transform to that? So that's the whole idea of patterns. So I'll just show you maybe an invent. We're here on this curve that I showed you. It's this whole idea of business design to improve the return and predictability of your business model by looking at these three things, right? So you start from an idea, you look at these patterns, and you start creating a business model. So maybe I can just show you a very simple one and make it even interactive after this to show you. But we came up with a whole library. So we have front stage disruption, which is more about market exploration, people who work on channels, find new ways to lock in customers. Then there's the backstage part where you think about how can you make it more scalable, find resources that are hard to copy, or very interesting, coming up with new profit formulas so you can disrupt the market like that. So one of my examples I like, it's a very old one, and I want you to quickly think, maybe just, the chat window can't be used, but maybe you can just think about what these three business models have in common. The Xbox, Windows, this is a game console, Windows operating system, and the iPod back in the day. So what do they have in common? So people sometimes say subscriptions. Well, there was never a subscription to the iPod, so that's not the case, but it's getting close, because what they have in common is they're all gravity creators. They all created switching costs and made it difficult for customers to switch. And what's interesting with the iPod, we'll use that as an illustration in a second, is we see it as a technology innovation, but it was always a business model play by Steve Jobs. So the business model pattern is very simple. Come up with the value proposition, new value proposition for a customer segment, but a value proposition that allows you to lock in the customers. And because you lock in the customers here, my little lock that I'm trying to draw, you're actually increasing the lifetime value of a customer. So think of this. Could you do something like this now during COVID-19 to explore a new business model that you didn't have the courage or time to explore before? So we show some sub patterns here, but interesting is we talk about trigger questions for each one of these patterns to inspire you to maybe think through a new business model in an industry where you've never used it before. Doesn't mean it's a new business model, but new maybe for your industry. So let's go back to the iPod just very quickly, because everybody sees a technology play while it was a business model play. And here's what's interesting is that I drew up the pattern, okay? And I'm giving you the components of just the components of the pattern for the iPod business model. So what could be interesting, you can kind of take a screenshot and then do the exercise for you afterwards and see if you learned something from this talk. Think of the sequence. Which letter goes with number 1? Okay, which letter would you put with number 1? Which letter would you put with number 2? Customer segments. Which letter would you put here with customer relationship? Which letter would you put with 4, with the revenue streams, channels, and then the key resources? I'll give you the answer. Here, number 1, that obviously 1,000 songs in a pocket, that is the value proposition that Apple offered to the mass market. But here's interesting. They offered 1,000 songs in a pocket because Steve Jobs wanted everybody to put all their songs into iTunes, onto the iPod, because once you had all your music library in the device, in the software, it would be very annoying to switch, which means it created switching costs and you would come back to buy Apple devices again and again and again. So without even a subscription, he created recurring revenues. And of course, sold through retail, they did also need to have some technology innovation to actually make this work. So that was, went a little bit fast. That's the idea here of gravity creators. Now, if you look at your ideas, or if you look at what you're working on, what's interesting, here you can use trigger questions as an inspiration, but when you have a business model on paper, or you have a business unit, you can start to assess new business ideas or existing business units and score them. How easy or difficult is it for your customers to leave or switch to another competitor? If it's very hard, as with the iPod back in the day, high switching costs. If you're in retail and you sell chocolate, the switching costs are extremely low, easy to switch, right? Now what happened, of course, to the iPod is Spotify, and they just killed the switching costs. So, and it's such a competitive advantage doesn't exist forever. So you need to reinvent yourself. You need to explore again, right? So that's what we tried to do with the patterns. And then ultimately we, created an assessment sheet so you can assess every single business model and use that maybe as a launch board. So one of the things you could do with your business model is now go back and start to assess it so you can actually download the questions for leaders or the assessment for business models. You can give your business model a score on these different dimensions and use that as an inspiration of what you could explore and change in your business model. And so that's just, that library is just one thing that we give people in order to explore. But obviously you can only do all of this, again, if, back to this one, you really built the ability to do both here, oops, losing the lines, if you built this portfolio to do things. Okay, so I'll stop here and see if there are any questions that came up. And I think some I can see in the chat window.
Alex, this was just reminding me of one of the exercises that we had back in Berlin in 2013 with sort of the layover sheets and actually putting the pieces together. It's a great showcase and a great little exercise. So let me just ask you two quick questions before we open the floor. The first is, you've been working on this for years and years all over the world with big companies and smaller companies. And how easy, you mentioned capabilities, how easy is it for these big companies that are used to the exploit part? How easy is it for them to build out that explore capability, really?
Yeah, so theoretically, it's actually easy. If the management commitment, if the leadership commitment is there. Now, if it's not, it's extremely hard or probably impossible. So let me give you, there was one question, I think, on culture and, how do you do this? And so I'll just show you a couple of things here. So number one, and I messed up my drawing because I'm experimenting here. There are actually 3 things you can work on in order to create the conditions, and we call this innovation readiness. There are 3 things you can work on. First one sounds a little bit trivial, but it's not. Leadership support. And leadership support means things like, how much time do leaders invest in innovation every week. So I have this, I call this the Rita McGrath test. The Rita McGrath test, very simple. It means look at the agenda of your CEO and check how much time he or she spends on innovation every week in the agenda, okay, in the agenda of the leader. And if it's less than 40% of his or her time, that's 2 days a week, innovation is not going to happen. If it's more, there's a chance that innovation will happen, right? I like to use that Rita McGrath test. Or you take the last 4 big management meetings. If nowhere on the agenda of those important meetings, you couldn't find innovation or growth and transformation, if it was not there, it's never going to happen, right? So 2 indicators to look at. So that's around leadership support. Other things would be portfolio management. You know, if you don't have a quarterly portfolio management, the innovation is not going to happen. The second one is organizational design. It means where does innovation sit in your org chart? So when innovation, and I'm not talking about R&D, I'm talking about innovation. When innovation reports to the person who reports to the person who reports to the person who reports to the CTO who reports to the CEO, innovation will not happen. So a wonderful example where that is well done is Ping An, Chinese company. They started out as a banking and insurance conglomerate. They were in the top 300 companies of the world. Less than 10 years ago, they decided to become a tech company, and now they're in the top 30 companies of the world. Because at Ping An, they created a co-CEO position that Jessica Tan took over to work on innovation. And Jessica Tan is responsible for this Explore portfolio. And that gives innovation clout when you have a co-CEO who manages innovation. So that is important to make it happen. And then the last one here that you want to have, oops, sorry, this is kind of ugly. What you want to have in addition to those that I just mentioned is the last one, probably the easiest one, is a great innovation practice, which means the right processes, the right tools, the right metrics, etc. So if you do this, this, and this, and we created the innovation readiness scorecard for that, another thing you can just download. If you have this innovation ecosystem and the right culture, then it becomes pretty easy because we actually know how to do these things. So that is pretty straightforward. But there's one thing that companies really struggle with. And guess what that is? It's failure. Having a culture where you can fail. And only few companies, like Jeff Bezos likes to say, Amazon is the best place in the world to fail. What he means is failure here, not in execution. But here's the thing. Let me try to draw this with a different culture and make it a question for the audience. In order to create, let's say, a $1 billion breakthrough idea, business model that makes it all the way up to here, to create this kind of great business model, how many projects do I need to invest 100,000 euros in? So how many 100,000 euro projects do I need in order to create one idea that will make it up to here? Is it 5? Is it 10? Is it 20? That's a guess, right? How many projects would I need to invest in order to get up there? You know the number, Christian, so that's easy, but most people probably don't. And they say maybe 10, 20, 30, 50. I'm not talking about ideas, I'm talking about investments. And the number is 250 because of those 250, actually 60% will fail completely. They will not return money. And only one out of 250 will be an outlier. And this is where the data stops because the data comes from early stage venture capital. Only 1 out of 250 will create a 50x return on capital, which is probably not even a $1 billion revenue idea, but just valuation. So the ratio is probably more like 2,500 or something like that. But companies, they have a tradition of investing in one idea and expecting it to succeed. So what you really want, and here is where my experiment kind of failed with the drawing. So I'm going to have to try to create a new layer here. See if I can make that happen. So I'm going to quickly have to redraw this. So just, it's important, because I'll give you a case to show you how this actually has been done, because otherwise it's all theoretical. So at Bosch, German company, they started to work like this. And what they did is, in order to have some ideas that would make it up here, in 3 years, they invested in 200 projects, okay? 200 projects, but only something like 130,000 euro. And after 3 months of testing, they would kill 70%, okay? So rest in peace. But they would tell the teams, you are not failures, this is just how it works. So only 30% would get follow-up investments, okay? So 30% would go on. So it'd be somewhere around 60. And then another 72% they would kill, again, rest in peace. And they would have, you know, something like 15, 14 that would make it up here. So they would gradually weed out ideas. And here they gave 300K investment, and then here they gave more investment. So what you create here is a funnel, but it means you can't pick the winner. And that's the most difficult thing, because you asked, you know, how good are companies at doing this? If you don't have an innovation funnel like this, you're not going to create a winner going up here. So what does that mean for us in the crisis? Don't bet on one horse either. Try to bet on 5 or 10 teams, and then one of them will make it up here. It probably won't be a multi-billion-dollar idea, but it will give you revenue pretty quickly. And this you can do very quickly with sprints, right? So now, if you already have that ability to explore, it's a lot easier, obviously, now. And most companies don't really have that yet. But Ping An is a wonderful example. Amazon is a wonderful example. And Bosch and Bayer are 2 wonderful examples of companies that are starting to really work like that.
You know, Alex, we could, and we probably should, you know, be spending hours on this. There's a lot of questions. This is really, really good and really relevant topic. People that want to, I'm just going to bring that first. People that really want to learn more right now, what would you recommend? How do they learn more right now on this?
Very easy. Get this thing behind me, the Invincible Company. And the reason is, so I'll make it, you know, very cheap kind of sales pitch, in the sense that we put everything we know in this book. Obviously, you can't go as deep, you know, when you have 400 pages, you have 400 pages, but we give everything away, because at Strategizer, we believe that the methodologies should spread, and then, you know, we actually make money from the teams and from the infrastructure we build inside the companies. So go and do that. And if, you know, you think the book is not enough, you can come to our virtual masterclass. So shameless pitch, because we want companies to improve. It's really not for us about, we still do masterclasses, even though we're a digital company, we're launching a virtual masterclass, but we mainly do those to get the methods out into companies and organizations. That was actually a lot less about making money. It's not our biggest revenue machine at the company, is really to raise the standards, to create more innovation professionals. That's our passion, to create innovation professionals, because I think we're a little bit, you know, at the amateur level still. What used to be good 5, 10 years ago is just not state of the art anymore. And if we can't measure the reduction of risk and uncertainty, the execution engine is not going to take us seriously enough. Innovation can't be a black box anymore, because it isn't, right? So we need to raise the standards in companies. And a lot of people who are here, I think, are already interested and want to go that step further. So just join us, and you know, you'll learn quite a bit.
Cool. So, Alex, I want to take a few questions here, and one of the first questions that we can start with is actually from Costa Rica. So, you know, someone who's closer to that beach of yours. How do companies actually, you know, cross the chasm between exploration and exploitation during this COVID-19? And, you know, specifically, you have a senior executive. They are facing downsizing. They're facing layoffs. Yeah. They should have invested in innovation years ago. They should have built capabilities years ago. Yeah. And now it's like, you know, yeah, how do we actually do this? It's really hard balance.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard balance. And, you know, it's easy for me to say from my comfortable chair, you know, I'm not managing, you know, 300,000 people or so. So you always need to be a bit careful with what you say. But I do believe, you know, there are a couple of ground rules that we can see now even for companies that are only kind of starting out. And we, interesting enough, a lot of our clients, so we work with multinationals from around the world, they did not stop at all. Like one pharmaceutical companies, they're actually really doing this with us in a distributed environment. And it's very simple in the sense that you need to still fully accept it's an and, it's not an either or, right? So you have to, and I'll put this in red so we can make it very clear. Your first task is to preserve cash. You do need to make this happen. You do need to, wasn't gonna raise. You do need to take away everything that you should take away in the short term to make sure you can get through the crisis. So that's, where you have to say probably, and Disney made the right call. Now, the challenge is that in a country like the US, there is no social safety net that, is the same as in Norway or in Switzerland or so. So that is something where the state should have helped. So as a company, you need to cut back. But when there's no safety net, you can't blame the company. You have to blame the country for not having built that. Sorry for the political statement, but the country is not there to save companies. The country is there to help people, right? And Scott Galloway, the NYU professor, talks a lot about that. But I think it's very, very important that the company's job is to create value for society. But if the company disappears, there's not much value they can create. So they have to preserve cash first. But the challenge is when, take the airlines, when you go out to government and ask for cash, I don't think, that's kind of fair. When you did all the share buybacks, again, a little bit of a political statement, and you don't have cash anymore when the crisis hits, and then you ask the government. No, Berkshire Hathaway or so, they put right amount of cash aside. So now they're not suffering and they can do these kind of things, right? So first, you have to focus on cash is king in this crisis, but you also have to start to rigorously explore. And here's one of the big myths in innovation. People think, if I want to make a big splash, I need to make a big bet. And that's wrong, because innovation, as we've seen, actually at the beginning is not expensive. I said 130K, 200 teams. That's not a lot of money for a multinational. If you are a smaller company, it's maybe 5 teams or 10 teams or one team exploring 3 ideas. If you're small, the same logic applies, and the same logic applies here. First, save the cash, right? But then aggressively explore what you could do in the future. Extremely important, extremely important. So I do think, all the methods really apply now, even though, it's a very different environment. It's a lot more difficult.
Just on that note, you mentioned Scott Galloway. Andrew Hill in Financial Times this morning had an article on, the end of efficiency-driven companies. Where he basically spoke exactly about what you're talking about here. There's a question here on cultural differences.
Yeah.
So do you see any cultural differences between, say, Ping An, China, and Swiss Re in Zurich or other, in terms of understanding and implementation of this?
So yes, but not because of countries, but because of company culture, right? Yeah. So the difference between, I'll take some of the organizations I don't work with, take UBS and Credit Suisse. I'm not working with them, so I can say things, or Nestle. The difference between them and a Ping An is a cultural difference. So what happened, a little bit less than a decade ago, is that the founder, Peter Ma, he said, we're going to go bankrupt. Our financial conglomerate is going to get killed by technology companies. And every financial institution is saying that. It's just that not everybody's acting as dramatically as Ping An. So what Ping An did is they said, we're going to invest 10%. Oops. Trying to get my layers going here again, sorry, so still experimenting a bit. So what they said is, we're going to invest 10% of revenues and 1% of profits. We're going to invest that in exploration. That's a big, bold move. And they started building, as I said before, under the leadership of Jessica Tan, an exploration engine. And they said, or Peter Ma said to Jessica Tan, you're not going to get it right. doesn't matter. Fail as much as you want, because it's like that. We're going to learn what we need to do. And guess what happened? Today, you have quite a few failures at Ping An, but you have great successes. So today, Ping An manages actually the biggest health platform, which is called Ping An Good Doctor. It was not Novartis, it was not Roche, it was not Pfizer who came up with the biggest health platform of the planet. It's a banking and insurance company, because they had the mindset and the culture, and because they're playing in an arena. So one of the characteristics of invincible companies is that they transcend industry boundaries. So Ping An said, we're going to play in 5 arenas. We're not going to limit ourselves by traditional industry boundaries. And that's a big, big idea. Business models, transcending industry boundaries, and the ability to reinvent yourself all the time. That's what leaders need to put in place in small and large companies.
This is very, very timely again. And I want to add one question, and then we're going to take more questions from the audience. Within your Explore category, what's your thinking on corporate venturing and acquisitions as a part of that mix?
Yeah, so I think that's absolutely great. Let me just show, whoops, wrong one here. I did mess up my drawing, so sorry. Some of the experiment didn't work the way I wanted to, but I do think so.
Yeah.
One of the things we did come up with Eve and the whole book team is what we call portfolio actions. And we have a whole series of actions, and one would be acquisitions here, divestitures here, and then here, you know, also investments in startups, for example. And what was interesting, you know, with some of the clients we're working with, they said in their Explore portfolio, maybe I should use this other image here that I had here. They both got messy. What they said is in the Explore portfolio, they should have mixed much faster corporate teams and startups. And I think the big challenge is today, still corporate venture capital is it's almost far away from the core, is its separate thing, which means it's not integrated. So the companies we work with, they say, we want to integrate our internal teams, ventures if you want, our entrepreneurs, we want to mix them with corporates, with the startups that they're investing in. So rather than having a distant corporate venture capital arm, they put these two together under the same roof. So that is number one. And number two is, I do think as a company, you want to play on all of those portfolio actions, acquisitions, investments, mergers, but those are the dominant ones today. It's not enough. You need to build your portfolio. And if you explore, it doesn't mean you need to grow the things yourself, you're just learning. But what you could do is, once you learn fast, you make a better acquisition. So it doesn't mean just because you have an Explore arm that everything you do, you're going to grow it on your own, but you will learn. And when you learn, you make better acquisitions. So the silly acquisitions will fall away. So you need to reserve the right to do all of this. And then it's really, every company has its own strategy. You take Tencent, you take Alibaba, they did a lot of investments. You take Amazon, it's a mix between homegrown and investments, right? So you need to play the whole range of portfolio actions. And I think one of the things we tried to do also with the new book is create a language, a shared language for portfolio actions.
So Alex, there's a lot of good questions here, but probably the last question that we'll get time to cover today. Let's talk about small companies. Yep. We have several questions on that. Smaller companies, maybe 10, 15, 20, 30 employees. Yep. They don't have the resources. Maybe they don't have the capabilities in place. What would be your sort of pointers for smaller companies?
Okay, so I'm trying to create a new layer. Look at that, almost worked. Let's see if I can draw on top of it because I made such a mess. So I believe it's exactly the same thing as in large companies, just at a different scale. And that goes down to a portfolio of one. If you're a one-man or one-woman show, right? You always have exploit and explore. And I'll just give you a small, silly example. Take comedians. You know how much time, when comedians do a new show, do you know how much of the whole show they invest on exploration? So how much of the time is it, 10%, 20%, 50%? and how much is it established material? Turns out, obviously, kind of the 80-20 rule, 80% they use proven material that they've done maybe 10, 15, 100 times, and 20% is new material, which allows them to bomb with 20% of the material because that will kind of go away. So even a comedian, a one-person, show, a stand-up, does this. Now, let's say you're a company that makes, I don't know, 10 million up to 100 million, euro or dollars in revenue. You still want to invest maybe somewhere around 10% of your revenues in exploration. And often it's not even money, it's the time of people, right? It's the time. Because over time, these people will have better skills. And the interesting thing is, everybody thinks innovation is about R&D, but it's not. R&D is expensive and it's hard. It's about technology. But innovation is actually much bigger. If you want, R&D, technology innovation is this. Innovation is bigger. Why is that? Because this is about business models. This is about value propositions. So technology innovation is a subset, or business model innovation driven by technology is a subset of the whole innovation spectrum. And my favorite example, sorry, quickly back to the big world, big companies, the Nintendo Wii. Inferior technological platform built a superior profitable business model, right? So that was interesting. But again, there are a couple of SME examples where, some of my friends run SMEs and we help them together with Yves. One is Laura Star. They make irons in Switzerland that they export throughout the world. It's high-end irons. And they invest a chunk of money here into creating this innovation funnel in order to have new things that here complement the exploit. It's just, you won't have 250 like we've seen before, or 200 like at Bosch. You might be working on 5 projects, and that's just fine. Because you just have to expect, of course, you won't get $1 billion return on 5 ideas. If you want $1 billion return, you're gonna have to invest in 200 to 1,000 ideas, right? Or projects. So it's just very simple. The bigger the return you expect, the more projects you need to invest in. So this is not inaccessible to small companies. It's exactly the same thing. I would even argue it's easier because the leadership has the full control. In large companies, there's so many variables that it's hard. I get excited, sorry. So
no, I think as always, Alex, the excitement travels through the cyberspace to audience from pretty much all over the world right here. So what would you recommend? We got the book. You mentioned the virtual masterclass. That's a pure online 2-day, 3-day program that you run.
So I was on mute. So the book is called Invincible Company. And since we had to close down our physical masterclasses, we launched and tested a virtual masterclass. So we actually tested the price points. We tested if people would be interested. And we're launching that end of May. So you can already sign up now. And what we tried to do is make it extremely engaging with exercises on whiteboards, because if it's just, about talking heads, I think it's boring. There's a lot of good content out there, but after a while, it's hard to listen to people, even when they draw. So we make it very engaging. So we have 3 half days of engaging exercises and content where we go deeper on the stuff I presented today.
Perfect. So Alex, this has been wonderful, as always. I look forward to seeing you again in real life, in person, sooner or later. If you're going to close out with one sort of just short message, a short recommendation, what would that be? Just a very, very short message.
We can't change the environment. We can't change the recession that we're going through. Make the best out of it. As silly and as that might sound, this is also an opportunity. So I do think we need to, and it's very stressful depending on what industry you're in. It can be very hard. But see the positive sides of what you're going to learn and how you're going to come out of this. I think, as long as we can stay healthy, that is then obviously the foundation, but everything else is, relative, and then everything else becomes an opportunity.
Well said. I think there are many on this webinar that hopefully take that advice to heart. Alex, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me. This is great. Thanks, Christian. Brett, thanks for organizing it in the whole series. It's some amazing speakers you pulled together.
It is, and everyone just said yes. Let's jump on it. And our next session with Bill Fisher, which is next week, will be very interesting. And then we'll have from lockdown in California, the latest updates from the view from the valley. But that's later. Alex, I know you're busy. Thank you very much for your time. Stay safe and best of luck with your work as always.
Thanks for having me, and have fun with Bill. Bill was one of my, and still is, one of my big idols. When I grow up, I want to be like Bill Fisher.
Well, Bill's an American. He's a little bit shorter, but besides that, you're pretty close.
Excellent.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening, morning, afternoon, and stay safe. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank everybody. Bye-bye.